have to first assess a risk in any of the patients, whether it's a lady or it's a male patient. In ladies, more than 65, yes, we have a role for aspirin. Less than 65, unless they have any other symptom, any other risk factors, we do not need to give an aspirin in those patients. Only those who have a higher Framingham risk score for cardiovascular disease, only those patients aspirin.
For Dr. Sapan Sood, urinary problems. It can be an overactive bladder, stress incontinence, urge incontinence. So, what is the main, which is the more common reason that gives rise to the urinary in menopausal?
In menopausal cases,
No, not menopausal. Which estrogen deficiency is there, but that deficiency is causing stress incontinence also, urge incontinence also. So which is the type of incontinence that we see, because then that's how you treat. You just can't be having stress incontinence and treat for urge incontinence.
I understand your question. Now you are saying what are the common urinary conditions, what are the commonest urinary conditions you will get in the post-menopausal.
The commonest one amongst these.
Well, you have two conditions which you yourself elaborated. One is the urethral stenosis, and that causing urinary symptoms, whether they are infections, whether they are thin stream, burning, dysuria, and all those things. And the second commonest is incontinence, whether it is stress incontinence or urge incontinence or total incontinence.
Which is the more commoner incontinence that you see or you come across in practice, because you have, if it is stress, you can't treat urge.
Okay. Incontinence, we are seeing more of overactive bladder. We don't have it in the textbooks right now, but I think a lot of field drinking, especially in this age group, that has to do with overactive bladder, because caffeine is a bladder irritant. And many times what I find is that in this age group, the ladies are taking more tea, morning teas and breakfast teas and pre-afternoon tea than afternoon tea. So, and one of the commonest precautions I tell is to cut down on the tea intake, and that reduces the overactive bladder to a large extent.
For Dr. Oberoi, use of these calcirol D granules, what is the frequency? Somebody is giving it monthly, somebody is using it weekly, somebody is giving gaps. What is the
see, the basic thing required is calcium and vitamin D, right? This is what is needed. This is the raw material. Okay, so this you cannot avoid. You have to give these.
how?
How? There is a simple way of calculating. What is the requirement? 1200 to 1500 is the calcium requirement. How much do you get from your diet? If you are Punjabi in the real sense, if you take your milk properly, if you take your dahi properly, lassi and stuff, then you are getting about 600, 700 or even 800 from your diet. Then you just need to have 500 from your tablet supplement. Okay, so that takes care of calcium. Vitamin D requirement is around 400 to 800, right? And if you go for a walk early morning, expose your body to sunlight for some time, and if you take your eggs and fish and stuff like that, then probably you are getting most of your vitamin D from your diet. In that case, you just need to, out of those 400 to 800 international units, you need to have about 200 to 300 international units from as supplements, right? So whatever tablet you get in the market, most of them will give you an equivalent of 500 calcium and an equivalent of 200 to 400 international units of. So to my patients in Punjab, I just recommend one tablet because I know that this guy is Punjabi, he must be having his milk and curd and paneer and lassi. Right?
So that answers your
my
question.
concern is about the younger ladies who undergo hysterectomy. I've seen most of the patients who undergo hysterectomy are never prescribed calcium or vitamin D. Even the women doctors have performed the hysterectomy. I think this is one point which must be kept in mind while you treat your patient for total hysterectomy.
Actually, now we are going to, I am again informing you people, we are going to have extensive CMEs on osteoporosis. We are going to have extensive CMEs on coronary heart disease. So again, this time my purpose is to sensitize non-gynecologists to the problems of the midlife women. And
Dr. Doshi, I would like to ask you a question regarding the vitamin D dosage. Once you establish that patient is osteoporotic and you want to supplement with calcium and vitamin D, the doses are very clear cut. 60,000 units of calciferol sachet to be given every week for 8 weeks. So what I do to the patient, I give them on first day 8 sachets, and I ask them to take 1 sachet every week for 8 weeks. After that, the dose is 1 sachet every month, and that has to be continued for longer time. Regarding intramuscular or injectable calciferol, it has been studied in European countries that the absorption, there is a problem with the absorption of calciferol injectable. So oral is the best preparation, and this is the standard dose, 8 sachets for 2 months and 1 sachet every month. This is one part. Second, sometimes my orthopedic friends are in the habit of writing too much vitamin D. They will say 1 sachet alternate day, 1 sachet twice a week, and it is very.
Guys, we don't do that.
Some of my son, not you.
Going to the controversial issues, please come back to our osteoporosis CME and our CHD CME, and please come discuss.
But I want to say that overdosage of calciferol can also be harmful, and hypervitaminosis D is another known complication.
Now we have an oncologist here, Dr. Anubha. Because she has been replaced by Dr. Now I just want to know about the incidence of cervical cancer in simple terms.
If you look into cervical cancer, the incidence we get from the cancer registries that we have. In India, we have urban registries basically. There are 5 urban registries which state that cervical cancer is constituting almost 16% in the urban registries.
Is it the number 1 cancer now?
It has cropped up to number 1 cancer, but breast cancer is coming up in the urban registries. It is coming beyond cervix cancer, whereas rural registries, if we see, especially those of Bashi, which was formed just to see about the incidence in the rural cancers, it states that cervical cancer still has a very high incidence of around even 37%.
Dr. Archana, you must be agreeing that our registries are not right, they are not completing data, everything.
Yes.
So might be we are doing more work on the breast cancer and we are not doing any work on the cervical cancer at all.
That is why I would like to pinpoint the statement which was made last year, which said that 1 death in every 8 minutes is due to cervical cancer.
Every 7 minutes one woman is diagnosed with cervical cancer. That is the enormity of the problem. How many of us are actually screening these women? And how many of us, these lady doctors have been screened for pap smear at least once in their life? Not every 3 years, not even once. Are any of the non-gynecologists referring their wives, their sisters, their mothers for the pap smear screening?
So the messages are being projected, but all that is the doctors, their wives, their mothers, their doctors, they have to come forward in case they are.
At least once you start from your own home itself, that you people should be starting. What are the guidelines for screening at this time cervical cancer?
Messages are being projected.
Because it's a big workshop itself. I had already done in 19 Jalandhar on cervical cancer last year already. Yeah. So what is the normal? Just give it a small. What should be the screening? Do you know? Because you are an oncologist. Sometimes people don't know about the providing.
Most of the time, the patient, once they come to us, they are already diagnosed and having cervical cancer.
So you don't know about the prevention.
Definitely. Once we are subjecting the patient to screen, that states that patient has to undergo either pap smear, which is the most common method that is available. Pap smear we are taking with a simple spatula or a spatula. We can
Don't go into the
pap
details.
smear. Okay.
Just tell us what the low resource country lies.
Low resource country, even where there are ASHA workers and nurses in the villages, they can perform tests like UVOS, iodine, acetoacetic staining, which can be done and see the cervix, which can show the initial precancerous lesions also. Pap smear can be done in a setup where at least the slides can be made and can be studied, and pathologists can read the slide and can give the diagnosis. Pap smear also, we can make even thin prep slides which are giving us more detailed analysis of the cells which are shared.
So one is pap smear, one is via,
And the third is the human papilloma virus, which adds to the specificity of the diagnosis we become more sure because we are well aware that HPV 16 and 18 are the main viruses which are main grassroots cause of this cancer. So HPV diagnosis complemented with pap smear leads to a good diagnosis as a screening method.
So we have 3 screening modalities available with us. One is the pap smear, one is the via Milli. These are the cytology diagnostics. Then we have the this HPV DNA, which is the molecular diagnosis, and we have to confirm this by the colposcopy and the biopsy when needed. And the simple procedure is the lead which every gynecologist can do easily and prevent, and we don't have to do hysterectomies in these cases. So
colonization can be done. If lead cannot be done, colonization can also be
is
done.
a procedure which is not being preferred by the gynecologist because it's very easy to do a lead procedure, and that's been found equally effective as colonization. That is done only when SCN3 is there, or when the higher end lesion is there, or when the endocervical canal is there, or when the abnormal endocervical glandular elements are there, when we cannot reach out to the upper end of the lesion at that time also, because it's a surgical procedure, it has to be done under anesthesia, but lead can be done by anybody as an OPD procedure. Now my question comes to our esteemed psychiatrist here, Dr. Himanshu. Yeah. Please let us know these psychological ramifications of, psychiatric ramifications of menopause.
See, as far as menopause is concerned, it is itself a contributor to depression. Irrespective of whether it is surgical menopause or primary ovarian failure or any of the other sort, 20% of the females who are undergoing menopause will have depressive symptoms at some point in time. So it is an independent marker for depression. Other than that, major depressive disorder, we have anxiety disorders in which panic disorder and OCD symptoms can exacerbate during the transition phase of menopause. Cognitive decline as well as the propensity to get Alzheimer's tends to increase after menopause, and sleep disturbances are very marked. About 40 to 50% of patients would have some sort of sleep disturbance, primarily insomnia, irrespective of whether they are having comorbid mood symptoms. And along with this, it greatly affects the sexual well-being and general well-being. So the females who are undergoing menopause would usually not enjoy their sexual life as they were doing before. So these are the major ramifications, psychiatric measures.
Very important question now. Does the HRT play a role in these psychiatric problems?
Yes, HRT
Which
does.
are the problems where HRT can help?
In case, once the patient is coming for treatment of depressive disorder, major depressive disorder, and she's already on SSRIs, and she's not responding to SSRIs, then we can start the patient on HRT. If the patient is refusing any psychotropic medications, then also we can put the patient on HRT. And if the patient is having severe somatic complaints and vasomotor symptoms, then again HRT does have a role. If there is a history of cognitive decline even before menopausal symptoms, then it would be good if we start HRT, because then that patient would have high chances of developing the Alzheimer's or cognitive decline later on. And again, patients who are having surgical menopause have a high propensity to develop major depressive disorder. So these are the patients which I would refer to gynecologist to be evaluated for it.
Further. Good. Also, you have told that is Dr. Parminder here? Yes, that. Yes, that. So my only question will be: does the andropause exist? And when the patient has low sexual disorder may come, would you please like to question him about his wife also?
Yes, because if he is saying that
partner, interpersonal relationship, are you asking them?
Yes, yes.
And if they have, would you refer that patient to gynecologist for further checkup?
Females I would, males would not go to gynecologist.
Not males, female of course.
Males. So if they are giving complaints that as we were discussing, that andropause is there, or we have to find interpersonal relationship, why he is not able to have routine intercourse with his wife, whether there are problems in him or in his wife, or they are both partners who are contributing to difficulty in sexual life.
Before I go to my very, very important panelist, Dr. Archana, and our physiotherapist, Dr. Varun, I just asked you one question on cardiologist. Dr. Mahajan, can we give HRT for the prevention of CHD?
No, HRT is not there for prevention
Yeah.
of CHD.
So
It is
far,
primary or
it's not
secondary.
indicated.
It is only for treatment of menopausal symptoms.
Yeah, but supposing I have started that patient on HRT and she is predisposed to having some coronary heart disease problems, maybe from the history or something. Maybe she's having a little bit raised cholesterol or triglycerides. Are you going to prescribe this woman HRT later on to prevent, because she is a young woman of 43, 44 years who has come to you?
There are diseases in which, cardiac diseases in which I would not like to give HRT at all. If a patient has a previous cardiovascular disease, has a previous history of angina, or
Of course, we are not going to
we are
give.
not going to.
She's healthy,
Now
otherwise.
now she's healthy and she has some risk factors for
Yes,
cardiac
what are
disease.
these factors? Just enumerate them.
There are both modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors.
Yeah.
Non-modifiable, unfortunately, male sex is one of them. But beyond 45, I think that doesn't come into play. But the modifiable risk factors definitely we need to assess in every lady. A lady who has very high, more than 20 Birmingham score. By Birmingham score, we calculate all these non-modifiable risk factors, and that is if they have diabetes, hypertension, lipid. Then I prefer not to give directly HRT. But there are a few conditions like only raise in LDL levels. There is only high LDL levels, and the other risk factors are not there. There are few such subgroups of patients where an HRT can be given and may slightly be beneficial.
Because of shorter paucity of time, I am not putting up those slides where we have done the studies now. And international menopause societies are very soon coming out with those guidelines. Yes, in younger patients, for prevention of CHD, you can give HRT. So that is what I wanted to share with you. That work is already in progress. Because when we have done the reanalysis of WHO, we found that the younger patients, especially with those estrogens, they didn't have, rather they had a decreased incidence of CHD when they were given the HRT. So supposing for the time being, if we start patient on HRT for any other problem like sleep disorders, for urogynecological problem, for hot flushes, for mood disturbances, and she responds to them, but at the same time, if she has some risk factors, some family history of developing a CHD in future, I think with proper counseling, we can continue HRT for 5 to 6 years.
I try to clarify this here that it is a timing hypothesis that earlier we start HRT, it is not harmful for the patient, but whether it's really beneficial for the patient regarding prevention of coronary disease, that is still not true.
They are coming out with those studies. That's what I'm telling you. I have removed those slides are there, but I have to talk about other things also. There is weight gain in that Dr. Rachana. So that weight gain is, I just thought that is redistribution of the fat mainly, and also because of the